Hello, BookTube. Well, as impossible as it may seem, summer is almost over. August is coming to an end. It's not going to feel that way if you're part of the 80% of the world that is currently under a heat dome and has been there for the whole of the summer. There are large parts of the United States of America, for instance, where I live, that have not seen temperatures go down into the double digits Fahrenheit, day or night, for a month. Which is, of course, completely unprecedented in the history of time that weather-keeping records have been kept, but it's also unprecedented since the dinosaurs were around. All of those people in the heat dome in America, in the heat dome in Europe, in the heat dome in Indonesia are all going to be happy to see the end of this summer. But it's still weird that August is almost over. And that means we're all looking down the barrel of September. The end of this week is the end of this month. September is right around the corner. And it has some BookTube events of one kind or another. There's Sumerian September, created by Michael K. Vaughan, where we are reading Conan in September. Ideally, the original Conan, Robert E. Howard's body of Conan work, which will only take you a month to read if you're at it every day. If you do 30 pages a day, you'll do all of it in 1 month. But there's also Shorty September. And I think, myself, that inadvertently, it's not planned this way, but I think the combination of Sumerian September, Conan in September, and Shorty September, the combination of those two events will really help you to come down, to ease out of another signature BookTube event, which is Garb August. All August long, we've been reading trash, reveling in trash, rolling around in garbage, and that can be a little habit forming, and you're going to want to ease away from that before you get into your winter Tolstoy, and the combination of Shorty September and Sumerian September helps with that, I think. Sumerian September is self-evident on its face. Shorty September is a new event to me. I'm sure it's been going on for a while, but I have never really participated until this year. And it is, as you can tell from the title, the reading of short work. The two hosts are, I think, Pastori Time and Soggy Expat Book Nerd. I'll try to remember to leave links to everybody involved. But they say that for September, let's read some short works. And they sort of canonize 200 pages as what designates. I say, let's shoot more for 100 pages. Let's go for really short works. Not only because there are plenty out there and they're really good, they tend to get swamped by the bigger things, but also because, as I mentioned in an earlier video, they give you some easy wins. If you are, for instance, in a book slump, or just the kind of gray area that Deb mentioned yesterday, a bunch of short books under your belt can really give you a sense of momentum. They can really fire you up. And another point that I don't want to stress too much because of all the writers out there and your tender feelings is that quite a few books that come to market at 250, 260 pages aren't any more than 100 pages, really. They've had gas pumped into them. But if you take that gas out, they're not much longer than this. And when a writer writes for that length or intentionally writes shorter than that length, marvels can happen. And I want to make some recommendations in this video for Shorty September. Just a few books, 10 books to give you an idea of some of the things that are out there. Plenty of other possibilities, but these are some that I want to show you. I think all of them have appeared on this channel in one way or another, but not mixed up like this. So the first one is this. It's a collection of writings called On Writing by the great Eudora Welty. And this is chapter after chapter of aspects of writing. And you've probably heard of other little books called On Writing. Some of them sell by the millions. One particular author's book, On Writing, has sold more copies than all of Eudora Welty's books all together in her entire life and in reprints all the time since she died until now. That one author's one crappy book on writing has sold better than all of Eudora Welty. All of it. In her time and since, all combined, probably by a factor of 100. That other writing book that I'm talking about by a writer who is still among us is taught in schools. This one's completely forgotten. This one is worth reading. That one is not. So we'll start with that. It's nice and short. We'll move on to a kids book. Of course, kids books are a gold mine for Shorty September because there isn't any such thing as a long kids book, except when you get to things, the vogue like Harry Potter. This is a genuine kids book. This is a scholastic book. It's for very young readers. It's by Deborah and James Howe. It is, of course, the classic Bunnicula, which is the story of an unsuspecting family who takes in a bunny. But is it a bunny? Or is it a vampire? I believe that the genesis of Bunnicula, I don't know this for sure because I don't know anything about these authors, but I believe that the genesis comes from the fact that in many lights, in many angles of lighting, Bunny's eyes look bright red. Maybe that was the original source of this. But this, as I don't need to tell the millions of people who have read this and loved it over the years, I'm sure that a lot of you have read this. It's very short. You can do it in half an hour. And if you haven't acquainted yourself with the original Bunnicula, you really should. Because there is a question that hovers throughout the whole book. Well, is the bunny a Dracula? Is the bunny a vampire? And, of course, if the bunny's not, might there be another villain in the house? Bunnicula is great. Then we have a book, Little Thing. It was barely expanded at all from a long magazine article, as a lot of these little books will be. This is a Reader's Manifesto by B.R. Myers. Tiny little thing. Don't know if it's in print anymore, but in this book, the original article, he takes a look at contemporary so-called literary fiction and rips it to shreds. Rips it to shreds. It is exactly the acid bath that a lot of those sacred cows have always needed. It's bracing to read. Some of you, who I have not been able to rehabilitate, who I have not reached yet, I will continue in my lonely missionary work to wean you away from the stupid dude bro crap you seem to love. But some of you who are firmly in the grips of that stuff will be enraged by this book. And maybe that'll do you some good. Maybe that'll cause you to reevaluate some of the stuff that you're mindlessly elevating. Who knows? Certainly it got tons of hate mail when the magazine ran the article. Then we have an oldie but a goodie. This is a very oldie but a goodie. It's not in print, hasn't been in print forever. This author's not in print, hasn't been in print forever. I've praised this author many, many times on this channel. He is terrific. This is Samuel Elliott Morrison, the great American historian, whose books tend to be very long and who wrote an enormously long multi-volume history of the U.S. Navy during World War II. But he also wrote a bit of autobiography that is charming. It's a tiny little book. It's called One Boy's Boston. And it's just his boyhood in a long-vanished Boston. And the thing that gives this tiny little photograph part of its charm is that the Boston that he is describing in this book had vanished by the time he wrote this book. It's not just that it's vanished now. It's that he also knew that he was writing a love letter not only to a lost youth, but to a lost era. And it's, I think, utterly charming. Just utterly charming. Maybe a little hard to find, but I'm sure that you can find it used, and probably for dirt cheap, because nobody knows how good Samuel Elliott Morrison is anymore. They don't. Then we'll go to another book that I've praised on this channel many, many times. You're going to love it. If you've never found it, you're going to love it. And it is tiny. It doesn't feel that way. When you look back on it in your reading memory, it feels longer than it is because it's so wonderfully done that you feel like you've lived the anecdotes inside it. This is by Margaret Stanger, and this is That Quail, Robert. And it is another, find a bird, bring it home, domesticate it, and it starts to rule the house book. There are many, many books like that. This one is about a tiny little quail. And it is funny and elegantly written and charming and also incredibly touching, as these kinds of animals in the household books always are. This is a classic of the genre. So any of you who, for instance, a couple of years ago, you might have read Saving Jemima about a blue jay. The pattern for all of these things was this. And I wholeheartedly recommend it. It's a tiny little thing. This cover was from, does it say? No, the cover doesn't mention, the cover has a blurb from the Boston Globe. That was not me, although I strongly second their praise. This cover was from a tiny little paperback that is fairly new, so you could find this. I'm sure that there are copies out there, and you're going to love it. We'll stick with the topic of birds here. This book is also well under 200 pages. I believe it's under 100 pages, and it's also not narrative, which we tend to think of when we think of books. But you can read it as a narrative. And this is The Golden Guide to Birds. It was written by two ornithologists, two practiced ornithologists, and it has beautiful original illustrations throughout. And it is just a guidebook to birds. On the surface, that's exactly what it looks like. You get the opening 20 pages are about bird evolution, bird ecology, birds in cities, birds in farms, birds in the wilderness. And then you get page after page of classic sort of showcase birds species. So this is not at all meant for the specialist. This is meant, it's pocket size. It's literally meant for you to carry it around in your pocket so that you can identify the major birds that you might see. The illustrations are beautiful. They aren't just the bird. They set the bird in a context against a field as winter is coming on, or in a forest, or by the eaves of a house. And the narrative, yes, it breaks down into bird-by-bird identification information, but you very much can just page through this. The narrative, the writers never lose that as they're breaking it down bird by bird. They never lose that urge to tell stories. So it's an odd choice, but it'll work for Shorty September. It is a book, and it's well under 100 pages. And it belongs in everybody's library. Everybody should have a copy of The Golden Guide to Birds. Everybody should. I'm not saying that everybody should have... There's a Golden Guide to Bats as well. I'm not saying that everybody should have that. But everybody should have the one for birds. Anyway, we're going to move on to fiction. A very short work of fiction from a master who is largely neglected nowadays. This is Hermann Hesse, and this is his book Knulp. Here's the little white mass-market paperback that was part of a whole series. He had a translation in the mid-20th century that did all of his major works. This and The Glass Bead Game and Magister Ludi and the book that overshadows this one, Damien. This is a story of a beautiful young man who wanders feckless and free. It's very much a response to youth movements. It's tiny. It's a tiny little book. And it's also pretty clearly, in the course of of reading it, it's obviously a kind of an original essay, an original attempt at the book that would become Damien. Still really touching and really good, and different from Damien in a lot of ways. And that some of you of a certain vintage might remember all of those white spine mass market paperback Hermann Hesse books. The only one that wasn't white spine was Siddhartha, and that was for a good reason, because Siddhartha was the big breakout hit. Steppenwolf was to start with, but Siddhartha went into schools and was taught everywhere, and it had a blue spine, but only in America, so it doesn't really matter. I don't know. No, this is obviously a minor work by this author, obviously, but it is, I think, still poignant and tiny, much shorter than anything else, any other novel that this author wrote. Then we move on to more fiction. This is not, you do not need to adjust your screen. This is the way that the trade paperback cover looks. This is James M. Kane, and this is his book Double Indemnity, which is an edge of your seat murder mystery that underscores the fact that if you are planning the murder of your husband for his insurance money, your best accomplice will be the insurance salesman. This is, I think that Kane is somewhat overrated. People tend to go to him as this kind of literary savior for the noir, Philip Marlowe-esque type writing. But he's very good. And Double Indemnity is the best thing that he wrote. So, and it's very short. You tend to forget that because you tend to see James Kane now either in an anthology or in an omnibus of his own work that is much bigger than just the tiny, skimpy little thing that this is. You could read it easily in an afternoon. And you'll get a lot out of it. There's a lot of meat on the bones for Kane. Then we go to Louise Welsh. I've recommended this book before on this channel. I don't know of anybody else who's ever read this book or ever recommended it. It's really, really good. I strongly recommend it. I'm pretty sure it's not in print anymore. It's Tamerlane Must Die. But it's not about the fictional character in Christopher Marlowe's play. It's about Christopher Marlowe. And it's wonderful. It's raw and raunchy. The opening scene with Christopher Marlowe is like no other opening scene in any Christopher Marlowe novel that I've ever read. You're never quite going to think of the dinner table the same way again. but it moves on from there, and it's really, really good. It's exciting. It's unvarnished. It's very much not lace and doily, thee and thou, Elizabethan period fiction. It's very much not that. And that's good. It actually fits with the characterization here. Of course, the idea here is that there's more to Marlowe than meets the eye. That's what used to make him so tempting for historical novelists. I don't know that he really is tempting to them anymore. When's the last time we saw a major mainstream novel about Christopher Marlowe? There's an ongoing murder mystery series with Marlowe as the protagonist, but that often isn't in bookstores. I almost never see that in bookstores, or I almost never have either. But aside from that, where's the last big Christopher Marlowe novel that we've had in the mainstream press? You have to go back a long way, I think. In the UK, maybe Ross Barber, she did the Marlowe papers, but it was a novel in verse. That certainly doesn't count. Anyway, this is a tiny little thing, very, very short, but well worth your time, especially if you're interested in Marlowe. Then we'll move to a classic. Of course, plenty of classics fit for Shorty September. I didn't want to go school marm on the whole event, but plenty of them do. I picked one. I picked The Art of War by Sun Tzu. This is in the new Norton edition with a translation by Michael Nyland. It's the only version of Sun Tzu to get. Unless you get the Norton Critical Edition, which adopted the Michael Nyland translation. But you probably want the little hardcover. The little hardcover that they make is very stylish. You've got the plate mail there. Nyland's translation is really, really good. It dispenses with a lot of the cod mysticism that a lot of other translators try to import to Sun Tzu to sort of make him more like other ancient Eastern writers. He isn't like them. That's part of the reason why he wrote an immortal work. This reads like none of the rest of them, so it is obviously the translation that I prefer. You might want to pick it up at your bookstore and flip it over. Well, The Art of War, if you haven't read it, find out what all the fuss is about. It's been enormously imitated, enormously influential. And it takes nothing. It takes an hour to read, so you might as well. And then we'll finish up with another book. We'll go back to the kids' realm. And this is also something that I've recommended on this channel many, many, many times before. It is so incredibly charming. It's by Farley Mowat, the author of Never Cry Wolf, the author of A Whale for the Killing. Wrote all sorts of books that were once upon a time, very well known. Once upon a time, if you were a bookseller, you had to know Farley Mowat's titles because people were going to come in and ask for them. I don't know that people know Farley Mowat anymore. I don't think that most of his books are in print anymore. But he wrote a book for kids called Owls in the Family. With a basset hound on the cover. But this is the story. You can barely make it out on the cover there. It's the story of a boy in Canada who just encounters another group of boys tormenting two lost owls. They found two lost owls. They've got two lost owls in a barrel, and they're tormenting them. The boy forces them to leave the owls alone and brings them home and adopts them. And they start quickly to take over the household. And this book is this kid's book is illustrated. And the illustrations are wonderful. The family does their best to make these owls feel at home. The owls don't need much encouragement. They start to boss everybody around. They start to take charge. They get a big coop of their own. And it's a delightful story. Just wonderful. It'll take you any time at all to read, but it will stick with you for the rest of your life. So I want to finish up a Shorty September recommendation video with Owls in the Family. Most of these things I've recommended before. But there's no harm in recommending again, especially in context of this event. Let's read a whole bunch of short stuff in September. You'll be amazed the wind it'll put in your sails. So I know that's weird coming from me because I admit my own preference when it comes to books of any kind is great, honking, whomping doorstoppers of books. March of the Mammoths is far more congenial a booktube event for me than Shorty September. But I will take this as well because I found genuine amazement in all of these books. And they're all tiny. So it can definitely be done. So there's just a few recommendations for you. I could make a whole bunch more recommendations along these lines, but this covers a nice gamut, and so I'm hoping that there's some food for thought in here for you. But I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.